Jackson County and got caught in quicksand. So they caught him because he never could get out of the quicksand. So the guys that were following caught him and took him to jail because he couldn't get out of the quicksand. That was kind of an interesting thing. Over by in Grassy Fork Township, they actually found the remains of a mammoth, which I did not realize they found anything like that in this area. But they found the tusks and the teeth and the bones of a mammoth. It was about 2 miles southeast of Tampico. So if any of you want to go out and dig around, maybe you can find something too. I did not ever realize they found anything like that in this area. And of course, another thing they found was a lot of moonshine. The biggest haul that they found was in Pleasant Grove. They found I think 14 barrels of mash where they were making moonshine. That was a pretty common thing, was making moonshine during that period of time. Another thing that happened was in Louisville, the police had come across this car that was loaded with moonshine in their trunk, and so they started up the highway toward this way. And at that time, let's see, Highway 31 was called Indiana Highway 1. And so they started up this way, so they radioed the police ahead, and the police in Seymour were waiting for them when they got there, and they shot them, and finally they got the car to stop. They'd shot it full of holes, and they finally got these people to stop. They called it a booze car, and so hauled them off to jail, and it was all from the cooperation of the 2 police departments. In the 1920s was the first time they ever had a state police organization called state police. They decided that, you know, all these things were happening. Well, something would happen in Portland and maybe the sheriff could take care of it, but if the people that had done whatever it was would go over the county line, they really didn't, sheriff didn't have any jurisdiction to go any further. And the city police in Seymour and Brownstown, I think, I'm not sure they had any Brownstown at that time, but they could only operate in their own jurisdiction. So the state decided that they needed some kind of police officials that could go all over the state. So the first state police was organized during the 1920s. There were a lot of Indians in this area, so lots of arrowheads and flints, different things have been found by various people through the years. I don't think anybody's found anything for a long time, but I think during a long period of time they did find a lot of Indian artifacts. At that time, too, some of the social clubs were much more popular. At one time, it was reported in the Brownstown paper that the Lions Club there in Brownstown had 400 members. Social clubs, service clubs, were becoming more and more popular as people had a little more spare time. When you worked a 52-hour week, you didn't have a whole lot of time to do anything, but as the work week decreased a little bit, people had more time to do other things. You think about the automobile, which of course the first automobiles started coming out in 1908, but by the 20s automobiles became a lot more popular. And they started out when they were first with the Model T that Henry Ford designed in order to buy one, and it would cost like $850, and most people didn't have it. But Henry Ford was a very enterprising businessman, and he actually invented the first assembly line. He paid his workers an unheard salary of $5 a day, and he rigged up this system with chains, and so they would pull the cars along, and then each person would do to the car what it was supposed to do in the factory. So he got lots of workers because $5 a day was a really big amount during that period of time. And so when he was able to produce more cars and the price came down, and so by the 1920s you could buy a car for $250. And even toward the later part of the 1920s, they started coming out in color. They had gray ones and brown ones, and that was a really big deal because prior to that, you could only buy a black car. So if you were going to describe your car to somebody and you said it's that black one over there, they never had any idea what you were talking about. The life expectancy in the 20s was not good. Of course, you had all these diseases to worry about. In 1921, I think it was, at the age of 39, Franklin Delano Roosevelt got polio and was crippled for life. There was no kind of remedy for nothing for polio, nothing for many of these diseases, nothing for lockjaw. If you developed tetanus from a contaminated farm fence, or however you managed to cut yourself or hurt yourself, there was no cure for it and there was no antidote. There was nothing to give people for tetanus. That was a very deadly disease. Smallpox was still around. There were still people with smallpox. Many adults were sent to what they called the pest house. They had a place in Brownstown, similar to a hospital, I guess. They called it a pest house. And people who were infected with diseases like that were required to go there. And another thing that was very common during that period of time was a poorhouse, which was also located in Brownstown. Does any of you ever remember the poorhouse? Yeah, I don't know where it was located. Do you?
Not really, but I thought it was out. Brownstown is confusing to me. Where I think I'm going south, I'm really going something like that. But it was on the edge of town, and I feel like it was on the southern part. And I think it was someplace close to the old city cemetery. Now, and I don't know for sure.
I don't know either, but especially old people who couldn't work, couldn't do anything, didn't have any money, and they were sent to the poorhouse, and the county would try to pay for the food that they ate and take care of them. I'm sure it was very, very minimal care, but there was no place else for these people to go.
So it was ran by the county, or?
It was paid for by the county. And I'm sure it wasn't anything fancy, but they had to find somewhere to put these people that had no relatives and no way of getting any help. And back then it was more common. People did not have money. You think about how they lived and what they did, and many of them particularly, they would be out in the rural areas by themselves, and they had nothing. And they had no way of supporting themselves. It was not always an easy time for people. You think about the fact that with no electricity, these women, not only were they trying to prepare meals on a wood stove with a wood and an oven that was maintained by either wood or, as time went on, coal. They would have coal for their kitchen stoves, but they had no electricity, no gas, no refrigeration, and so
the Iceman always came.
Yeah, the Iceman came, and when I was a child, we had the Iceman because when we moved into the home we lived in, when we first moved to Seymour on my 4th birthday, we had no electricity, no central heat. We had a stove in the living room, and the living room was warm, but believe me, nothing else was. And and the Iceman would come and deliver ice 1 or 2 days a week. you put a sign up in your window, whether you wanted 50 pounds or 25 pounds or however much you wanted, and then he'd come in the house and put it in the icebox for you if you weren't home, and you just left the money on the kitchen table and he'd pick it up on his way out. And so it was a pretty trusting time. I can't remember my parents ever locking a door when I grew up, ever. We went to bed. We didn't deal with locking the doors, nobody did.
You didn't have to.
Yeah, it was, you know, of course that was in the 1940s, but still at that period of time, we got electricity when I was about 6 or 7. And I still remember how exciting it was because we went from coal oil lamps and we had an electric bulb hanging down from the middle of the living room ceiling and the kitchen ceiling, and we were so excited because you could just turn it on and turn it off. And you can imagine a lady getting up in the morning to get ready for her day. I thought about that this morning. I got up about 6:30. It was pitch dark. If that had been my mother, she would have had to get the lamp and light it, or take a candle and light it with a match to get downstairs, to get to the lamp, to light the lamp. Then she would, you know, stoke up the fire in the stove if my dad hadn't done it already, and then she would begin to cook breakfast. And then she would heat the water on the stove to wash the dishes and rinse the dishes and put the dishes away, and then begin her day's chores. And at noontime, she would repeat, you know, to fix some kind of meal for us, and again in the evening. And every time you fixed a meal, you also had to wash the dishes, try to sterilize them by using hot water, but you'd have to heat all your water for everything. And I can remember very, very vividly her doing that. And you know, if you wanted a chicken for your dinner, first you caught the chicken, and then you killed the chicken, and then you cleaned the chicken. Have any of you ever cleaned a chicken? Have you ever cleaned a chicken? And, you know, you cut them open and you take all the insides out, you know, and you dispose of them and keep what you want, and then you cut it all up, and then you fry the rest. And that was our standard Sunday dinner, was fried chicken. And it was about the only time we had meat. We didn't have that much meat. But when I think about what my mother went through to prepare this, and it was just a routine part of the day. That's what you did. And so, you know, I get up and throw a few things in the dishwasher and turn it on and leave. And I think, my goodness, how did she ever do it?
I think about larger families back then and all the dirty diapers, and you can't throw them in the washer. I mean,
Well, yes, that was before disposables.
Yes, of course.
And I'll have to tell you, I had 5 children and no disposable diapers. So
We used real diapers for most of them.
they started coming along about the time I had my last child, but by that time I was so used to it, I could fold diapers in my sleep. And
they always had to be on the clothesline.
right. And you would hang out your clothes, and if the weather was cold, they all froze, and then you'd take all your clothes down, all your frozen shirts and pants, and carry them in the house to thaw out, and then you'd dampen them down, and then you'd iron them. And of course, you know, I brought a few little souvenirs of things from a long time ago. And, you know, this is how you ironed. And if
Oh, well, now, wait a minute, I always had an electric one.
well, you had electricity. I did not live in a house with electricity when I was very young. And you put this on the stove, and you put the wood in the stove and heated up your stove, and you put this on there, and then you'd have to use like a tea towel or something because the whole thing would be red hot.
Yeah.
And then you ironed your clothes, and you always had 2 of them because one of them could be heating while you're using the other one. And that is how my mother ironed clothes when I was very little. Washing machines started becoming popular in the 20s, and the first ones had gas engines like a lawnmower. And you would put gasoline in it, and you would start your engine, and it would make the washing machine agitate. And, you know, prior to that, it was pretty much you washed them out by hand. And then as electricity became more common, electric washing machines.